The year was 1925, and Chicago's South Side thrummed with the dangerous energy of prohibition. Vincent Vinny Romano adjusted his suspenders as he climbed the narrow stairs to the speakeasy above. Murphy's butcher shop. The scent of sawdust and gin filled his nostrils as he pushed through the heavy curtain that separated the legitimate business from the lucrative illegal one below. At 28, Vinny had carved out a respectable position in the Torrino crime family. Not quite a made man, but close enough to taste the power that came with the title. His calloused hands, stained permanently with motor oil from his day job at the garage, gripped a brown paper bag containing tonight's earnings from the numbers racket. The speakeasy buzzed with conversation and the tinny sound of a gramophone playing. Ain't she sweet? Smoke from Lucky Strike cigarettes created a grey haze that danced in the amber light of kerosene lamps. Men in wool suits and suspenders crowded around small tables, their voices low as they discussed business that couldn't be conducted in daylight. But Vinny's attention was immediately drawn to her. Elena Rossi stood behind the makeshift bar, polishing glasses with a white cotton towel. Her dark hair was pinned back in the fashionable finger waves of the era, and her simple blue dress with its dropped waist couldn't hide her natural grace. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous waters, serving bootleg whiskey to men who could end a life with a snap of their fingers. "You're new," Vinny said, approaching the bar and setting down his fedora. Elena looked up, her brown eyes meeting his with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "Started 3 days ago. Mickey Torrino said I could work here if I kept my mouth shut and my ears closed." Vinny nodded approvingly. Smart girl. In their world, discretion was more valuable than beauty, though Elena possessed both in abundance. "What's your story?" "You're not from the neighborhood, Brooklyn," she replied, filling a glass with amber liquid from an unmarked bottle. "My father worked the docks until a shipping accident last month. Now it's just me and my younger brother. We need the money." The honesty in her voice struck something in Vinny's chest. Most women in their circle had learned to lie as easily as breathing, but Elena's desperation was genuine. Her hands, he noticed, were soft, but showed the recent calluses of someone unaccustomed to manual labor. Dangerous work for a respectable girl, he observed. Accepting the whiskey, Elena's chin lifted slightly. Respectability doesn't put food on the table or pay rent. Besides, I can handle myself. Over the following weeks, Vinny found himself returning to the speakeasy more frequently than business required. Elena intrigued him in ways that the painted flappers and moles of his usual acquaintance never had. She was educated. He'd caught her reading newspaper articles between customers, moving her lips slightly as she worked through the longer words. She asked thoughtful questions about the world beyond their neighborhood, about the movies playing at the Palace Theatre, and the new radio programs everyone was talking about. Their relationship developed slowly, built on stolen conversations during quiet moments in the speakeasy. Elena would save him the best sandwiches from the kitchen, thick slabs of mortadella and provolone on fresh Italian bread. In return, Vinny would walk her home through the dangerous streets, his presence ensuring no other men would bother her. By autumn, they had fallen into a comfortable routine. Vinny would finish his collections for Mickey Torrino, stop by the speakeasy for dinner and conversation with Elena, then escort her back to the tenement building, where she shared a cramped apartment with her 15-year-old brother, Tony. "You could do better than this place," Vinny told her one evening as they walked past the flickering street lamps. The October air carried the smell of burning leaves and the distant sound of an elevated train. "Better how?" Elena asked, pulling her thin coat tighter against the chill. "Move somewhere nicer. Let me help you and Tony get set up proper." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. "Vincent Romano, are you making me an improper proposal?" The formality of her words made him smile. Even after months of knowing her, Elena maintained a certain dignity that set her apart from the rough world they inhabited. "Maybe I am. Would that be so terrible?" "That depends," she said, resuming their walk. "What exactly are you offering?" It was a fair question. Vinny wasn't in a position to offer marriage, not yet. His status in the family wasn't secure enough, and his income, while steady, came with the constant threat of police raids or rival gang violence. But Elena had become important to him in ways he was still trying to understand. "I'm offering to take care of you," he said finally. "You and Tony, a better place to live, money for his schooling, security." Elena was quiet for several blocks. When they reached her building, she paused at the bottom of the front steps. "I need to think about it." Take all the time you need, Vinny replied, though his heart was already racing with the possibility of her acceptance. What he didn't know was that Elena had already made her decision. The question wasn't whether she would accept his offer. It was how long she could maintain the facade of considering it while she figured out how to use their relationship to secure a better future for herself and Tony. In the dangerous world of Chicago's underworld, everyone was playing angles. Even the most innocent-looking Italian girl from Brooklyn had learned that survival sometimes required making choices that respectable society would never understand. 2 weeks passed before Elena gave Vinny her answer. During those 14 days, she had carefully observed the rhythms of his world, noting which men commanded respect and which ones scrambled for scraps of attention from Mickey Torrino. She watched how money flowed through the speakeasy, who paid protection money, and which businesses prospered under the family's umbrella. Most importantly, she had listened to the whispered conversations between the men when they thought she wasn't paying attention. The Torrino family was solid, but they weren't the biggest operation in Chicago. That distinction belonged to the Castellano crime family, led by the notorious Don Salvatore Castellano, a man whose reputation for both generosity and ruthlessness had made him a legend in the underworld. On a cold November evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the sidewalks, Elena finally accepted Vinny's proposal. They sealed their arrangement with a kiss outside her tenement building, and within a week, she and Tony had moved into a modest but clean apartment on the better side of the neighborhood. The change in their circumstances was immediate and dramatic. Tony, who had been working nights at a factory to help make ends meet, was able to return to school full-time. Elena traded her worn dresses for newer ones, though she was careful not to appear too extravagant. In their world, drawing the wrong kind of attention could be dangerous. Vinny was attentive and generous, bringing her small gifts, a bottle of French perfume acquired through mysterious channels, silk stockings that had fallen off a truck, tickets to see Charlie Chaplin's latest picture at the movie palace downtown. He treated her with a respect that surprised her, never pressing for more intimacy than she was willing to give. For her part, Elena played the role of grateful mistress with calculated precision. She cooked elaborate Italian meals for Vinny when he visited, using recipes her grandmother had taught her back in Brooklyn. She listened sympathetically to his complaints about Mickey, Torrino's unrealistic expectations and the constant pressure from rival gangs encroaching on their territory. But Elena was also gathering information. During their conversations, Vinny would sometimes let slip details about the family's operations, which speakeasies were struggling, which police officers were on the payroll, which businesses were considering switching their allegiance to competing organizations. Elena filed away every detail, building a mental map of Chicago's criminal landscape. She had learned early in life that knowledge was power, and power was the only thing that could guarantee security in an uncertain world. Her father's death had taught her that depending on others was a luxury she couldn't afford. Even her arrangement with Vinny, comfortable as it was, remained temporary in her mind. One evening in December, as 1925 drew to a close, Elena was walking home from the market when she noticed she was being followed. The man was tall and well-dressed, wearing an expensive overcoat and a Homburg hat pulled low over his face. He maintained a careful distance, but Elena had grown up on the streets of Brooklyn and knew when she was being watched. Instead of heading directly home, she ducked into Rossini's bakery, a legitimate business that also served as a neutral meeting ground for various criminal enterprises. The warmth of the ovens and the smell of fresh bread provided a stark contrast to the cold danger she sensed outside. "Miss Rossi," came a voice from behind her. She turned to find a man in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a three-piece suit with a gold watch chain visible across his vest. His hair was perfectly slicked back with pomade, and his shoes shined to mirror brightness. "My name is Carlo Benedetti. I represent certain interests that would like to speak with you." Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." Carlo smiled, revealing expensive dental work. "Please, miss, we both know you're more intelligent than that. You've been asking questions, making observations. My employer appreciates intelligence in a woman, especially when that intelligence is being wasted on small-time operations. And who might your employer be?" "Don Salvatore Castellano," Carlo said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He's heard about the beautiful and clever young woman who has captured the attention of Vincent Romano. He's also heard that this woman might be interested in improving her circumstances even further. Elena felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. The Castellano family was the most powerful criminal organization in Chicago, possibly in all of the Midwest. Don Salvatore himself was a legend, a man who had built an empire through a combination of strategic thinking and calculated violence. "I'm very happy with my current situation," Elena said carefully. "Of course you are," Carlo replied. "But happiness is relative, isn't it? What makes a woman happy when she's struggling to feed her brother is very different from what might make her happy when she has the protection and resources of the most powerful family in Chicago." Elena pretended to consider his words while her mind raced through the implications. This was an opportunity that might never come again, but it was also incredibly dangerous. Betraying Vinny would mark her as untrustworthy, but refusing the Castellano family could have even more serious consequences. "What exactly is being offered?" she asked. "A meeting," Carlo said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. There's a small restaurant called Antonio's on the north side. Come alone, and come prepared to listen to a proposal that could change your life." With that, he tipped his hat and walked out of the bakery, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the weight of a decision that would determine not just her future, but possibly her survival. That night, as Vinny held her close in their warm apartment, while snow fell softly outside the windows, Elena stared at the ceiling and wondered if she had the courage to take the greatest gamble of her life. Elena spent the following day in a state of carefully controlled anxiety. She went through her normal routine, shopping at the market, preparing lunch for Tony before he left for school, tidying their apartment, but her mind was consumed with thoughts of the evening ahead. Antonio's restaurant sat in a quiet corner of the north side, far from the Torrino family's usual territory. As Elena approached the modest storefront at precisely 8 o'clock, she noticed the subtle signs of heavy security. Men in dark overcoats stood at strategic positions along the street, their eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. The restaurant's windows were covered with heavy curtains, preventing anyone from seeing inside. A well-dressed young man opened the door before Elena could knock. "Miss Rossi," he said with a slight bow. "Please, follow me." The interior of Antonio's was elegantly appointed but understated. White tablecloths, flickering candles, and the soft sound of violin music created an atmosphere more suited to a romantic dinner than a criminal negotiation. Only 3 tables were occupied, and Elena recognized the diners as men whose faces occasionally appeared in newspaper crime reports. At the far end of the restaurant, seated alone at a corner table, was Don Salvatore Castellano. Elena had expected someone more physically imposing. Instead, she found herself facing a man of average height and build, perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair and intelligent dark eyes. He wore a simple black suit with no flashy jewelry except for a thin gold wedding band. When he stood to greet her, his movements were precise and economical. "Miss Rossi," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Please sit." Elena settled into her chair, acutely aware that every person in the restaurant was likely armed and loyal to the man across from her. Don Castellano poured wine from an expensive bottle into 2 glasses, his movements deliberate and practiced. "You're wondering why I asked you here," he said, not making it a question. "The thought had crossed my mind," Elena replied, pleased that her voice remained steady. Don Castellano smiled, the expression transforming his face from stern to almost paternal. "I've built my success on recognizing talent, Miss Rossi. Whether it's a young man who shows promise as an enforcer, a business owner who demonstrates exceptional loyalty, or a woman who possesses the intelligence to navigate our world with remarkable skill." He paused to sip his wine, studying Elena over the rim of his glass. "Vincent Romano is a good man, but he lacks vision. He's content to collect numbers and run errands for Mickey Torrino, never seeing the larger opportunities that surround him. You, however, are different." "How so?" Elena asked, genuinely curious despite her nervousness. "You watch, you listen, you understand that information is more valuable than money, and that positioning oneself correctly is more important than immediate gratification." Don Castellano leaned forward slightly. "These are rare qualities, especially in someone so young." Elena felt a flush of pride at his words, even as she reminded herself to remain cautious. "I've learned to be observant out of necessity, indeed, and that necessity has prepared you for greater things." Don Castellano signaled to a waiter who brought a plate of antipasto. imported olives, aged cheese, and paper-thin prosciutto. I have a proposition for you, Miss Rossi. One that would provide you and your brother with security beyond anything Vincent Romano could offer. Elena's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm listening. My nephew, Antonio Castellano, is 26 years old. He's intelligent, well-educated, and being groomed to take over significant portions of our family's operations. He's also been looking for a wife, someone who understands our world but brings her own strengths to the relationship. The implication hit Elena like a physical blow. Don Castellano wasn't offering her a position within his organization. He was offering her marriage to his heir apparent. I'm very flattered, Elena began, but Don Castellano raised his hand. Before you respond, let me explain what this would mean. Antonio controls our operations in 3 states. Your brother would receive the finest education money can buy, university, perhaps even law school if he shows aptitude. You would have a position of genuine authority within one of the most powerful organizations in America. Elena's mind raced through the implications. Marriage to Antonio Castellano would elevate her from the mistress of a low-level gangster to the wife of a crime family prince. The security, the power, the opportunities for Tony. It was everything she had dreamed of since her father's death. But it would also mean betraying Vinny, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. What about Vincent? She asked quietly. Don Castellano's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Vincent Romano is a business associate, nothing more. When business arrangements change, people adapt. Those who adapt successfully continue to prosper. Those who don't. He let the sentence hang in the air, its meaning unmistakable. I would need time to consider this, Elena said. Of course, but not too much time. My nephew is eager to meet you, and opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely. Don Castellano reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. This contains $500, a token of good faith. Consider it a sign of the life you could have as part of our family. Eleanor accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. $500 was more money than she had ever held at one time. More than Vinny made in 3 months of collections. There will be a New Year's Eve celebration at my home, Don Castellano continued. If you decide to accept my proposal, attend the party. Antonio will be expecting you. If you choose to remain with your current arrangement, simply stay away, and we'll never speak of this conversation again. As Elena walked home through the snowy streets, the envelope burning like fire in her coat pocket, she realized that her comfortable life with Vinny had just become infinitely more complicated. In less than 2 weeks, she would have to choose between loyalty and ambition, between the man who had saved her and the family that could transform her life completely. The decision would define not just her future, but the kind of woman she was willing to become in order to survive in a world where power was the only currency that mattered. The days leading up to New Year's Eve passed in a blur of internal torment for Elena. She went through the motions of her daily life with Vinny, cooking his favorite meals, listening to his stories about work, and accepting his gentle affections, all while the weight of Don Castellano's proposal pressed heavily on her conscience. Vinny seemed to sense something had changed, though he couldn't identify what. Eleanor caught him watching her with a puzzled expression when he thought she wasn't looking. During their conversations, he would pause mid-sentence, as if waiting for her to respond to something she hadn't heard. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening, as they sat in their apartment listening to radio programs. The Andrews sisters were singing "Bei mir bist du schön" through the crackling static. "Something bothering you?" Elena looked up from the sock she was darning, a domestic task that had become strangely comforting in its normalcy. "Just thinking about the new year, I suppose, wondering what it might bring." Vinny moved from his chair to sit beside her on the small sofa. "I've been thinking about that too. About us. About making things more permanent." Eleanor's needle froze mid-stitch. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time we got married," Vinny said, his voice carrying the nervous excitement of a man making a leap of faith. "I know I'm not the biggest fish in the pond, but I can provide for you, for Tony too. We could have a good life together." The irony was almost unbearable. 3 months ago, Eleanor would have been overjoyed by such a proposal. But now, with Don Castellano's envelope hidden beneath her mattress and the promise of unimaginable power within her grasp, Vinny's modest offer felt like a prison sentence. "Vincent, she began. But he interrupted her. You don't have to answer right now, he said quickly. Just think about it. We could have a spring wedding, maybe May. Something small but nice. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. That night, as Vinny slept peacefully beside her, she stared at the ceiling and made her decision. When morning came, she began making preparations for the New Year's Eve party at the Castellano mansion. The Castellano estate sat on 20 acres of prime real estate north of the city, surrounded by high walls and carefully manicured grounds. As Elena's taxi approached the imposing front gates on the evening of December 31st, 1925, she felt as though she were entering a different world entirely. She had spent most of Don Castellano's $500 on a dress, suitable for the occasion, deep blue silk with intricate beadwork and a fashionably low waistline. Her hair was styled in perfect finger waves, and she wore borrowed pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. The mansion itself was a testament to the wealth that flowed through Chicago's underworld. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over rooms filled with expensive furniture and original artwork. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in elegant gowns moved through the space with the confidence of people accustomed to luxury. Elena was announced at the door and immediately escorted to where Don Castellano stood receiving guests. He wore formal evening wear that had clearly been made by the finest tailors, and his manner was that of a legitimate businessman hosting a social gathering rather than a crime boss orchestrating his nephew's introduction to a potential bride. "Miss Rossi," he said warmly, kissing her cheek in the Italian fashion. "You look radiant. Come, there's someone I'd like you to meet." Antonio Castellano was nothing like Elena had expected. Where his uncle was reserved and calculating, Antonio possessed an easy charm that filled the room. He was tall and handsome, with the kind of classical Italian features that belonged in magazine advertisements. His smile was genuine, and when he took her hand to kiss it, his touch lingered just long enough to suggest romantic interest without being inappropriate. "So you're the mysterious woman who has captured my uncle's attention," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested European education. "He told me you were beautiful, but his description hardly did you justice." As the evening progressed, Elena found herself genuinely enjoying Antonio's company. He was well read, having spent 2 years studying in Rome, and he spoke passionately about art, literature, and music. Unlike the men in Vinny's circle who viewed education with suspicion, Antonio clearly valued intelligence and culture. More importantly, he treated her as an equal rather than an ornament. When other guests made casual remarks that dismissed women's opinions, Antonio would redirect the conversation to include Elena's perspective. When she mentioned Tony's academic ambitions, Antonio immediately began discussing the best universities and offering to make introductions to influential people who could help with admissions. As midnight approached and the party reached its crescendo, Antonio drew Elena onto a balcony overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The sounds of celebration continued inside, but out here they could speak privately. "My uncle tells me you're considering becoming part of our family," Antonio said, offering her his jacket against the cold. Elena wrapped the expensive wool around her shoulders. "I'm considering it, yes. And what about the man you're currently with? Vincent Romano, isn't it?" The directness of the question surprised her. "That's complicated." Antonio nodded thoughtfully. "Love usually is. But in our world, we sometimes have to choose between what our hearts want and what our minds know is necessary for survival." "And which did you choose?" Elena asked. "I chose to trust my uncle's judgment," Antonio replied. "He's never steered our family wrong. And he believes you're exactly what I need. A partner who understands our world, but isn't corrupted by it." As the clock struck midnight and fireworks exploded over the city skyline, Antonio leaned down and kissed Elena gently. It was a kiss full of promise and possibility. A kiss that tasted of champagne and a future she had never dared to imagine. When they broke apart, Elena knew her decision was made. She would marry Antonio Castellano and leave her old life behind. The only question remaining was how to break the news to Vinny, and whether he would survive the betrayal. 3 days later, engagement announcements appeared in both the legitimate newspapers and the underground publications that served Chicago's criminal community. The message was clear. Elena Rossi had chosen her side, and that side belonged to the most powerful family in the city. Vincent Romano learned of Elena's engagement the same way everyone else in Chicago's underworld did. Through the morning edition of the Tribune, where a small announcement in the society section mentioned the upcoming marriage between Miss Elena Rossi and Mr. Antonio Castellano, nephew of prominent businessman Salvatore Castellano. Vinny had been sitting in Murphy's diner, enjoying his usual breakfast of eggs and coffee before starting his collection rounds, when Mickey Torrino slammed the newspaper down on his table. "You see this?" Mickey demanded, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Your little girlfriend just made us all look like fools." Vinny stared at the black and white text, reading the words over and over as if repetition might change their meaning. Elena Rossi, Antonio Castellano, spring wedding planned. The woman he had loved, protected, and planned to marry had vanished from his life as completely as if she had never existed. "Vincent," Mickey continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "people are laughing at us. They're saying the Torrino family can't even keep track of its women, that we're so weak the Castellanos can steal from us without consequence." But Vinny barely heard him. His mind was replaying every conversation with Elena, searching for signs he had missed, clues that might have warned him of her intentions. Had their entire relationship been a lie? Had she been planning this betrayal from the moment they met? The next few weeks passed in a haze of bitter realization. Vinny threw himself into his work with desperate intensity, taking on dangerous assignments that others in the family avoided. He volunteered for debt collections in hostile territory, confronted business owners who had fallen behind on protection payments, and generally behaved like a man with nothing left to lose. Because in many ways, that's exactly what he had become. Elena, meanwhile, had moved into the Castellano mansion to prepare for her wedding. The transformation in her circumstances was dramatic and immediate. She had her own suite of rooms decorated with imported furniture, a personal maid, and access to luxuries she had never imagined. Tony had been enrolled in a prestigious private academy and was thriving under the attention of expensive tutors. Yet despite the material comfort, Elena found herself thinking about Vinny more often than she cared to admit. Antonio was everything a woman could want in a husband: handsome, intelligent, wealthy, and genuinely kind to her. But there had been something raw and honest about her relationship with Vinny that was missing from her interactions with the Castellano family. With Vinny, she had been Elena Rossi from Brooklyn, a working-class girl trying to survive in a dangerous world. With Antonio, she was being molded into Elena Castellano, a crime family princess who needed to project elegance and sophistication at all times. The wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in April, and preparations consumed Elena's days. Dress fittings, menu tastings, guest lists that read like a directory of Chicago's most powerful criminals. Every detail was orchestrated to demonstrate the Castellano family's wealth and influence. 3 weeks before the ceremony, Elena made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She asked her driver to take her to the old neighborhood, claiming she needed to collect some personal items from her former apartment. Instead, she went to Murphy's diner, knowing that Vinny often ate lunch there. He was sitting in a corner booth, mechanically working his way through a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. The sight of him stopped Elena cold. In just 2 months, Vinny had lost weight and gained a hardness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His clothes, once meticulously pressed, looked wrinkled and careless. When he looked up and saw her, the expression on his face nearly broke Elena's resolve. Pain, anger, and something that might have been hope flickered across his features before settling into cold indifference. "Elena," he said quietly, "shouldn't you be picking out china patterns or something?" She slid into the booth across from him, ignoring the curious stares of other diners. "Vincent, I need to explain—" "No!" he interrupted, his voice steady but dangerous. "You really don't. You made your choice. Now live with it. It wasn't about you," Elena said desperately. "It was about survival. About Tony's future. About security." Vinny laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You think I don't understand? You think I'm too stupid to see what you did? I never thought you were stupid. Just not good enough." Vinny pushed his unfinished meal away and leaned back in the booth. "You know what the funny thing is? I actually admire what you did. It took guts to play the long game like that. Most people in our world only think one move ahead." Elena felt tears burning her eyes. "Vincent, don't," he said firmly. "Don't apologize, don't explain, and don't pretend this means something it doesn't. You made a business decision. I respect that. But don't insult me by trying to make it into something noble." Vinny stood up, dropped money on the table for his meal, and looked down at Elena one last time. I hope it works out for you. I really do. But Elena, don't ever come looking for me again. We're done. He walked out of the diner without looking back, leaving Elena alone with the weight of what she had sacrificed for security and position. The wedding took place as scheduled on a beautiful April morning. Elena walked down the aisle of St. Mary's Cathedral in a gown that cost more than most people earned in a year, surrounded by flowers flown in from California and music provided by a full orchestra. 500 guests watched as she married into one of the most powerful crime families in America. But even as she spoke her vows to Antonio, Elena found herself thinking about a modest apartment where she had once been truly happy, and a man who had loved her enough to let her go rather than fight a battle he couldn't win. Years later, when Elena had become one of Chicago's most influential women and Tony had graduated from Harvard Law School, she would sometimes catch herself wondering what her life might have been like if she had chosen differently, if she had valued love over ambition, loyalty over opportunity. But by then, it was far too late for regrets. In the world they inhabited, second chances were as rare as honest cops, and the choices made in youth echoed through every day that followed. Vincent Romano eventually left Chicago, disappearing into the vast anonymity of Depression-era America. Some said he went west, others claimed he died in a gang war. Elena never learned the truth, and perhaps that was for the best. Some betrayals, after all, are too profound for forgiveness, even from oneself.